I'll be back.
All right, folks, we are here at the Gateway to Freedom event in St. Louis, right across the line from Missouri here, and we have the one and only Dr. Robert Malone. I don't think he needs a long introduction, but tell us a little bit about yourself. So you have been in the vaccine industry for quite some time. As a young man, California, is that right? Recently, I saw a little bit about your story there. You started out there, and you became kind of famous locally there. Your small community, small college, where you were doing some research.
Well, I'm not sure where to go from that. I'm a physician scientist. I was trained with my bachelor's at UC Davis in biochemistry. My medical degree is from Northwestern University. I did my graduate training at UC San Diego and the Salk Institute in the Laboratory of Molecular Biology and Virology in what was then one of the top two gene therapy labs in the United States, perhaps the world. And while there, I focused on trying to ask questions about how retroviruses are assembled and how the RNA gets packaged in the retrovirus. And in order to do that, I built a suite of technologies and inadvertently ended up inventing mRNA delivery, and that led to the development of core mRNA vaccine technology as well as DNA vaccines. After I left the Salk and joined a startup company that was right across the street called Vical. And that resulted in a bunch of patents that were all filed in 1989 and purchased by Merck and then returned back to Vical. And during that period where they held all those patents, they blocked anybody else from using them, but all they focused on was the use of the DNA. And so they blocked me and all other companies from working on the RNA because it was a potential competitor. And so it wasn't until those patents expired that this RNA vaccine technology space took off and gave rise to products that we now have. I don't want to call them vaccines.
Yeah. You've been very much tied to the vaccine industry, think tanks, startup of companies, research. You've been in with the government. DARPA or BARDA or
yeah, I've won or managed over $2 billion in federal contracts. I have done multiple startups. Like you said, I've worked for Bill and Melinda Gates founded companies, Eris Global TV Vaccine Foundation, and PATH, which is kind of the original Gates nonprofit in Seattle. And after the planes hit the towers, I was in the middle of doing a startup company called Inovio. It's still ongoing. It's another vaccine company, different technology. And I took a job with a large Department of Defense contractor called DynCorp Vaccine Company that had the portfolio for all biodefense products for the clinical stage through licensure. So I've had experience with virtually all of the key vaccines having to do with biodefense, and that was in 2001. So since then, I've really transitioned from being a discovery researcher running a bench lab to the field of clinical research, regulatory affairs, project management, that whole suite of things that you have to have once a product candidate has been developed that you need to have to take it all the way to licensure. So I've worked in regulatory affairs sweatshops, writing protocols, meeting with the FDA, all that kind of stuff, writing INDs. And over the last 20 years, I've also worked for large pharma, Solvay Pharmaceutical in biologics and development of a cell-based influenza vaccine under a government contract. So I've kind of done the whole breadth of things and really been an expert in biodefense and vaccines and other countermeasures. I'm security cleared from the Department of Defense, and was at the tip of the spear driving the Canadian Ebola vaccine that had been purchased and was being sponsored by the Department of Defense, and driving that through World Health Organization and then getting it licensed to Merck, and that's now the Merck Ebola vaccine. I've done drug repurposing also closely with the DoD in USAMRIID for infectious diseases, including yellow fever and Zika, and was working on a large drug discovery project for Defense Threat Reduction Agency involving organophosphate agents. So this is nerve toxins, chemical warfare, to try to come up with drugs that would help protect soldiers. When I got that infamous call from somebody that I published with before that was a CIA officer at the time, who was in Wuhan.
Yeah. So now before we get in there, so I'm a country doctor, medical doctor down in Mississippi, and you're a MD, PhD.
Actually, I got a master's, not a PhD.
Okay.
I took a master's in lieu of the PhD because I had a nervous breakdown when I was at the SALT, as everybody was kind of fighting over these patents that we now call the original patents for DNA and RNA vaccines.
So we come from different worlds. I come from a very conservative background. You know, I mean, I voted for Trump. I don't know who you voted for, but I want to get to. I mean, you've been an insider with the government, with the research, with the funding, with the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, these big pharma. So now and you even took the vaccine. So I know I watched an interview with you the other day. Some people think you may be a plant and all this.
Yeah, this whole storyline of me being controlled opposition is basically paranoia. It comes up from time to time, and some people weaponize that accusation as a way to get attention for themselves, frankly, just the same as Alex Berenson got attention for himself by attacking me on Laura Ingraham's show about ivermectin and whether I'd actually invented the vaccines. So this is a play. It's a form of trolling.
Yeah.
It's called concern trolling. Is what's going on. So for those that think I'm controlled opposition, have a good day. But for the rest of you, listen to my words and what I've done, and judge me by my actions, not by some rumor that somebody that has an axe to grind is certain.
Yeah. So I mean, surely you've lost some friends, some positions, some things in your past, right? I mean, are you being discriminated against?
I'm kind of persona non grata in the government right now among some people, but I've also there's a underground group of resistors in the federal government that are fairly high in rank that have reached out to me and visited me and shared information with me confidentially. So I think my sense is that there are good people in the government. There are good people that have confidence, that know what's going on, can see it. Many times they're very frightened. To go to work for the government, usually you have both a combination of a little bit of naive optimism about what you're going to be able to accomplish. You want to do good work, generally, most people that are in those higher levels. But also, you're very afraid of speaking out and doing the kind of things that I do. They're afraid of the backlash and being ostracized and being labeled. This is why part of the reason why there's been targeting of physicians, myself and many others, is that we serve as examples. And so if they can take us out and ridicule and gaslight and defame us, as has happened with me, then that has a it's helpful in intimidating everybody else. So that's part of what's going on with the Govies, as well as with many physicians. Is they just, if you're sitting there, you and me we're at a stage in our career that I suspect you've also paid off your medical student loans. And
it took me 12 years, but
yeah.
I was 42 when I paid my last note. So
a little more than 12. I was in my 50s. But for those that haven't paid it off and have young families and mortgages and things like that, most of whom are employed by corporations. Like back when we thought that we wanted to be doctors, when we had this image of a country doc, which we embody, but that's all kind of gone by the wayside. And these poor souls now work for administrators and MBAs, and they tell them what to do, and if they don't toe the line, they get fired.
So now I've been hanging around you and Jill, your wife, with these conferences from time to time. I know a little bit about you personally. I mean, you live on a farm, raise horses. I mean, you're a worker kind of guy. I mean, you do some.
I was a carpenter. I was a carpenter in the farm before I was a physician. So I drive a Kubota 60 horse with a loader. It's the smaller version. I used to have a larger one, but this one's more of a construction tractor because what we did was we lost our shirts in the real estate collapse. We were living in North Georgia and had a farm there, and there was no way that we could pay that off, and the economy had collapsed. And so we just did a deed in lieu of foreclosure and walked away from the farm and drove up the coast and found a place we could lease where we could put our horses, our breeding string. And then we gradually built out from that. And about 5 years ago, Jill found some raw pasture land in a really interesting county in Virginia called Madison, which is up against the Shenandoah National Park. Beautiful area. We have what California would call a river. Here it's called a creek in Virginia that wraps around the farms. We have tons of water, good pasture, and we completely own the place now. And I paid off the tractor. We own 30, and then we lease about 120. So we got plenty of pasture land for the mares. We'll be having 5 foals this spring, and they're Lusitanos. Some people think we have the best breeding string of these rare Portuguese horses in North America, and they compete really well in dressage. And our our foals, when they hit the ground, the ones that are okay go for about 12. The ones that are good go for about 20. When they're born, and then they kind of go up from there. And we sell. People that buy them are basically upper middle class and wealthy women. We ship them all over the United States and in Canada. So we treat it as business. It's not a hobby farm.
So who takes care of all these horses while you and Jill are traveling to Ireland?
That's been the problem. Is we've just been the demands over the last 2 years and putting up a Substack every single day make it really hard to get anything done. This weekend I was supposed to be running the trencher to put in some fiber optic cable between the various farm buildings, and that's not going to happen. So we have a young woman from the local area that has been working for us since she was 16. Unfortunately, she's going to be going away to college pretty soon. And some other folks that we pay part-time to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
So not to bring all your kids involved, but I know you do have some kids, just like I do. I have 4 kids. 2 of them have just graduated from medical school. We're not on the same page. My kids in medical school got vaccinated. I think one of them may not get boosted, but my other one, I just met with another day, and he was asking how I was doing. The vaccine subject came up. And we started talking about it, and he said, Dad, it makes me nervous. But I don't even want to talk about vaccines. And so, I had to give him some safe space. But I mean, this is tearing families apart. Has there been anything in your family that you want to talk about?
Both of our sons, who are both married, our older son, they're both computer scientists. One lives in West Virginia, one lives in Northern California. And they really don't like me talking about it. They really object to that. So, yes, it has really caused some strains. And so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Out of my respect for them, their request.
I just, people, I think they want to know who Robert Malone is. We know that you invented this early technology, mRNA vaccines. You have patents on that. You're a physician, scientist, been in that world, and we want to talk about your politics. And but let's start with when COVID first came out. How you got all involved in that, and what all happened, because you know people in high places, different places, government. And you got a phone call, but you got vaccinated. That's the big question people ask me over. How did Robert Malone get vaccinated? I mean, he's so smart.
So I've answered this. I've answered this at least 100 times. I was already scheduled to speak at conferences in Europe, and I knew that there was no way that I could travel internationally if I wasn't inoculated. Let's not call it vaccinated. I also had long COVID. I was infected in the very first wave of Wuhan in late February of 2020, and it hit me hard. I actually began self-treating with some of the drugs that we'd identified through our computer screen, one of which was commodity. And I got good clinical responses with commodity myself. And then for our farmhand's father also, who's quite overweight. We'll talk more about him because of patient confidentiality. But he was also kind of pulled off of the brink. But it left me with long COVID. I thought I was going to have pulmonary interstitial fibrosis, and I might have 5 years left to live. That's a kind of a pretty profound thing. And at the time, I'm trained in pathology. So at the time, and I taught pathology to medical students at the University of California and the University of Maryland schools of medicine. So I thought that this is gonna be a one-way street with a pretty short cul-de-sac, and I couldn't do my chores anymore. Couldn't hardly walk up the hill, and I was still suffering from this. And there was a lot of talk early on. I got inoculated in the very first wave when the military was dispensing the vaccine. There was only one vaccine made available, which was Moderna, unfortunately. And so I needed to travel. I was going to have to be vaccinated for that. And there was a lot of talk in the press that, number one, there was a lot of denialism that long COVID even existed. And also a kind of counter buzz that was coming out of various chat rooms and communities that the vaccines might help by giving you a big dose of the antigen. It might pop your immune system so you can clear the long COVID symptoms. So I thought for those two reasons, I'd go ahead. So I took the jabs, and the second one, I absolutely was vaccine damaged. I got hypertension to a systolic of 230, narcolepsy, restless leg, a number of other things, tinnitus, and so Jill went and looked up our batches when the How Bad Is My Batch website and lo and behold, the second one, which is the one that the lot number for my second Moderna dose, was one of the ones that was associated with a very high rate of adverse So I continued to have the long COVID symptoms after that, so did nothing about it until my friend Meryl Nass was visiting. And she recommended and wrote a script for ivermectin, which it just turned out was right on the threshold. It was almost exactly a year ago. It was 1 year to the date when I was first in San Jose to speak at their conference that I just went to 2 weekends ago. And I took the time to spend a little bit of time with our younger son and his wife and go hiking. We stayed in Monterey Bay for a few days, and then I gave a talk. And I had started the ivermectin, and within 24 hours of starting it, I was out hiking everybody, and my son, his wife, and my wife, as we were hiking along Big Sur, which was totally new for me. I mean, usually I'm a strong hiker, but this had really kicked me. So I'm an absolute believer in ivermectin. So that's the story. Is we all make mistakes. Yes, it's useful to remember back then that the government was hiding most of the data about the adverse effects. And Jill and I had assumed that all the proper studies had been done because, this is my business. And so we assumed that in this early deployment of the vaccines, that it was all on the square, that the right things had been done. And it was only kind of since then, I knew there were some things that just didn't seem right, and I'd spoken to Peter Marks about that, who's the head of CBER. But he reassured me that the data packages had come in and that there was nothing of any concern. So, yeah, I was reassured by the director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research directly telling me that he had reviewed the data and there was nothing to be worried about.
So, I mean, you got duped. I mean, you were naive
to
believe that these folks had our best interests. So, I mean, if Dr. Malone can be duped, Trump, I think he got duped in
I absolutely believe that Trump got duped by Birx and Fauci and this character named Matthew Pottinger. I'm going to probably talk about that a little bit since we're talking about the Department of Defense guys here. Pottinger is absolutely the one that injected the CCP protocol, the lockdowns and the masks, and promoted it within that small leadership clique run by Birx, ostensibly by Pence, but really by Birx. And you'll recall that Kushner brought in Scott Atlas, who was at that point, this is many months later, raising questions about the strategy and whether it made sense, valid questions. And Kushner, I think, very appropriately brought him in as a counterpoint. They absolutely rejected him and wouldn't listen to anything he had to say and ridiculed him and ran him out. I think Scott Atlas is still not quite sure what happened to him.
But now
he got run out of the rail. I mean, if it had been the old days, he would have been tarred and feathered.
Yeah, but Kushner, this is Trump's son-in-law, married to Ivanka. I mean, could he not have pushed a little harder to I mean, was he kind of? I heard he kind of took over that whole operation, so to speak, from the inside.
A little bit, and what we've also come to learn is that what he did is he brought in friends of his from business school, people that didn't have any background in public health or vaccines or infectious disease, and he relied on them. They're the ones that they wrote the protocol that we've all had to experience with the lockdowns, the closing of the churches, everything else. That was written over about 24 hours by some MBA types that were Kushner buddies that had no background in public health.
So Dr. Fauci's coming out now saying he was not part of the lockdown. So there may be some truth to that.
Peter Navarro's a buddy of mine. So we've talked about this, and I've talked to others. I think it's a complex landscape, and absolutely, Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci are trying to rewrite history right now, and trying to backpedal as fast as possible. And in a fascinating way, if you listen to what they're saying, they're trying to blame Rochelle Walensky, who wasn't even there. And what they never blame is Bob Redfield, who was the CDC director at the time. Nobody ever says Bob. They're all blaming Rochelle, and I think there's plenty of blame for Rochelle, but she was not responsible for setting the original policies. I mean, they're clearly under her guidance, the reputation of the CDC has been destroyed. But to blame her for what clearly were things that were implemented with Deborah Birx's strong advocacy, and is just it's just scapegoating. They're just throwing her under the bus, trying to rewrite history and deflect blame from themselves.
And now they're saying, just coming out this week, Trump's to blame for all the operations.
Yeah, well, that was predictable, right? I'm sure you were stunned when you saw that.
Yeah, I was stunned, So if Trump, becomes president, would you go work? Would you go work? I don't know. Dr.
So
Fauci
what you
chief medical advisor to the U.S.
So the topic comes up from time to time. In the guy that raised this question before you was Steve Bannon at CPAC. He said it a little more abruptly.
Yeah. Steve, abrupt.
From time to time. I really do not want to live in D.C., and I really don't like D.C. culture. I've spent my whole life dealing with those people, and I would rather be poisoning rats in my barn than and picking up the carcasses than dealing with D.C. If there is an opportunity to serve in an administration that is committed to defanging the administrative state and has a good plan for how to do it, it would be my honor to serve as a public, if in the interest of trying to fix the mess.
So who needs to be defanged first? CDC, FDA, NIH, NIADA?
So what Trump did, remember he came in talking about he's going to drain the swamp. Yeah. And he got blocked at all kinds of levels for trying to do that. And what he found out, to his surprise, you remember he came in as the guy that fired people. That was kind of his brand. And he found out that he couldn't fire people.
Yeah, you can't fire federal government workers.
And particularly the senior executive service, which are the couple thousand people that literally run the government. So he got blocked in all kinds of ways in trying to do that, and he didn't really understand government. He has no experience, or had no experience before that. And he brought in other people that were his buddies that really didn't have a lot of experience either. And they kind of got bushwhacked. They didn't know what they were walking into, and the administrative state just rolled. And people like Fauci and Birx and whole type of bureaucrat. And eventually, he came around to building an executive order to create something called Schedule F, which was a whole new employment classification. And they were going to put all the employees into the Schedule F, which had clauses that would allow you to fire people, so he could hold people accountable. And that got, of course, resisted in every possible way. And it finally passed through the courts. And was about to be deployed, had all the approvals, and he lost the election. And the very first thing that Mr. Biden did when he took the position was his first action was to rescind Schedule F. Okay, which gives rise to, I mean, there's a whole lot of pointers as far as I'm concerned. It's Mr. Biden is not running the government. The government is running Mr. Biden. And the government, specifically the part of the government that's running Mr. Biden, is the senior executive service. They have their own flag. They're permanent employees. It's interesting. So when you recall when Rochelle Walensky gave this director of the CDC, gave this press conference in video where she said, I am reorganizing the CDC, remember, and we've had these failures. We need to become less academic. Okay, that's a bizarre thing. The only thing that she's ever done other than run the CDC, and she apparently doesn't even live in Atlanta. She's staying in her house in Massachusetts and running it all by video. So she says, I've come up with this reorganization plan. I'm going to implement it. And it needs to be less academic, more transparent. We need more money and more power over the states, right? So, what a surprise. The backstory to that is there were two big studies done, both by people from the senior executive service, one of which was her chief of staff. So basically, her chief of staff, who's been running the CDC, did a study about how messed up the CDC is becoming. And they did these two studies. The other was a senior executive service person brought in from another branch of HHS. And what they did was they implemented a new committee. Right? That's how it works in DC. If you don't want to take responsibility for bad stuff happening, okay, you form a committee. Because nobody in the committee can be held accountable, right? You can't point to this person as the person responsible. So they formed a committee who's now going to advise Rochelle Walensky on what the CDC priorities have to be and how they're going to run it. Which is to say, they basically, the SES, the Senior Executive Service, came in, ran a couple studies, kneecapped Walensky, and put in place a committee to run the CDC now. And who did they bring in to run the committee? An ex-Obama official who was a former senior person in HHS who used to be the boss of the senior executive service guy that came in and ran the larger of the two studies. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, sarcasm. So it's a great example of how this whole thing works. Is she is now full on a figurehead. And I don't think that she knew at the time that she was going to be thrown under the bus. But that's what's happening. And it's kind of an example of how DC runs, and a great example of why I'd rather be an hour and a half south of DC rather than in it. But, if there is an opportunity with an administration that's committed to breaking the back of this. And you asked about, your question was, who needs to go first? And the problem is really not about the person. It's about the whole system and being able to hold the system accountable. And these lifelong bureaucrats run the government. And I think they're the ones, in a sense, the intelligence community and the FBI are kind of operational arms of the administrative state of the senior executive service. So what we're seeing happening, you can see it, I think, really clearly with what they've done with Bannon's group. Steve got swatted. I don't know if you know where they call up in 9/11 and say, "Hey, there's an active shooter in your house." He got swatting is now a common weapon against us. So Steve got swatted, and then Peter Navarro got put in leg irons when he arrived at Reagan National Airport. He lives literally across the street from the FBI. Okay,
I could have just came over
they,
and knocked on
they just started to say, "Hey,
you know, leg change,
yeah,
arm change, looks a
yeah,
lot better.
yeah." The atmospheric.
He's kind of a big, he's got a big muscle. He can, kind of
Well, he rides his bike all the time. He tries to stay in good health. And they ran a hit piece about him in the Atlantic, and then they ran a hit piece about him in CNN, and then he had the testimony where they've convicted him now. He's still awaiting his sentencing. Navarro, they're trying to put him in the slammer for 2 years on misdemeanor charges. Okay, and his hearing, I think, comes up next week. They're basically trying to shut down Malone. But that's how they play these days. I mean, it is. I keep saying it, people don't hear it. We are in an information war, a media war, which is unrestricted. And everything goes. There's no ethical boundaries in our opponents in this fight. They'll do anything to win. They're kind of seem to have their heads wrapped around the idea that the ends justify the means. And to your point about partisanship, whether you're left or right or Democrat or Republican, in my mind, all that stuff has become irrelevant. There's many people who formerly were affiliated, considered themselves center left, had voted Democrat. Paul Barrett is a great example. Pierre Corey, the majority of the docs that we toured with used to consider themselves Democrats. Now they have no home, or their home is with Republicans. After what we've experienced, but I got to tell you, there's all these words like rhinos and the Uniparty. It's real. You look at Mitch McConnell. Is Mitch McConnell with us? Oh no. I mean, near as I can tell, Mitch is more with the Communist Party in China than he is with the interests of the Republican or people like us. Let's call ourselves conservatives.
Yeah, I think he's married to one.
He is
a very powerful woman.
So the whole idea of Democrat, Republican, right, left, all of that's kind of scrambled up. The way I like to think about it is, are you somebody who believes in autonomy and the rights of the individual? Or are you somebody who believes in collectivism? And I think that's the new dipole, the new dialectic is, are you a collectivist? And do you believe in social engineering? And do you believe in centralized global government? Or do you believe in a decentralized world in which you have to take personal responsibility for your actions, and you have the right to succeed or fail, and you believe in a limited government that stays out of your face, lets you run your life, doesn't tell you how to teach your kids, doesn't impose social agendas on your children's education, doesn't feel like they have to come in and tell you how you have to farm. That's or do you want to live in a world of this kind of constant fear and mind control, where they're scaring you about CO2 levels and whether or not your cows are going to cause the world to burn? All this fear and scare and information control. Steve Bannon is of the opinion that, and I'm watching it happen. The internet is getting scrubbed. The stuff that's happened over the last 2 years is getting scrubbed off the web. You can't find it. Things, journal articles, newspaper articles that are not in the interests of the state, administrative state, the people that are defending this narrative that's clearly so false, the narrative that the virus is so deadly, and that the vaccines are fully safe and effective. It's not just Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. They're going through and cleaning out the internet. The other day I was shocked. You may or may not know that Wikipedia has really been aggressively editing everything about me and made my Wikipedia page look like I'm, the devil himself. And there's been another wiki called WikiStudios that has documented and traced all these different people who are members of the intelligence community, and the people that are the CNN anchors that actually are the Council of Foreign Relations, which is it's like 40 of them, and had documented all the edits on my Wikipedia page and who did them and when it happened and all this other stuff from everybody else. That's gone. It just, as of yesterday, it's gone. It's as if it never existed. It has been scrubbed from history. The only way you can find it is if you go on the Wayback Machine. My point is, as Steve Bannon has predicted, they're going through and methodically cleaning out information on the internet, your ability to access it, that makes them look bad.
So total control of information, medical, political.
I gave a talk on in Oahu 2 falls ago. We were there, the same group of physicians were there supporting 2 of our friends, one of whom was speaking here yesterday, Robert Malone. People were trying to take away their medical licenses. And I gave a rally there in the park, and I said, I used to feel sorry for the people that lived in China, that were constantly being monitored by the state, that had to live in an environment in which the internet was being monitored and controlled all the time, where information was censored. They weren't able to really get access to information. And I used to feel sorry for those people. They had internal passports. And now we are they. They've taken the Chinese model, these people that are so committed to global government, centralized global government by unelected officials, the World Economic Forum, the UN, the World Health Organization, all that. They've taken the Chinese model and implemented it here in the United States. And it's largely happened. It did not happen under Trump. Some of it did. The honest truth is that there was meetings with Amazon and Facebook and Twitter in the White House in February of 2020, in which they all agreed they were going to be censoring information. And people don't often know it. My wife and I got this call from the CIA officer on January 4th of 2020, alerting us about this. She got busy. I got busy screening new drugs and getting my team oriented towards that. She got busy and she wrote a book that she self-published on Amazon for a while, called How to Prepare and Protect Yourself from the Novel Coronavirus. Didn't even have a name back then. She got it out the first week in February. Us, academic, we're both, she's a PhD, had the references in it and everything. Solid information. And we had it out there on Amazon. It got deleted in March, and we asked Amazon, because if they do this by their policy, they'll always tell you why. What was the reason? Oh, you're guilty of publishing pornography, whatever the thing is. Okay, they've always had a policy they tell you so that an author can correct it, whatever the sin was. And in our case, they would never give us an answer. And finally, we asked and asked and asked. No one would talk to us. No one would tell us. And then they came with this phrase that I'd never heard. You've violated community policies. That's all they would ever say. Okay. Now they say that all the time now when people get kicked off of Twitter and Facebook and all those kinds of things. That's the common phrase. But my point is that went all the way back to the very early days of Trump administration response. So this censorship that we've seen, it's just like it's put on hyperdrive since the current administration came in, and all of these totalitarian measures, like a lot of the mandates, etc., that they've imposed, and obviously the censorship has really got but it's both administrations. And this makes the point. This kind of emphasizes what I'm saying. This is about the administrative state. It's about what these bureaucrats run everything, and somehow you got to bring them down. And I'm not willing to work in the government unless it's with an administration that is committed to trying to break the back of the administrative state. Because without that, you're lost. It's just go into the office and spend time. You're never going to be able to get to do that.
But with your experience and background, you understand. If there was a leader that was willing to go the distance, you could direct them on how to do that.
And I know of three that are all strong candidates that are all being actively considered or considering. Two from the right and one from the left, one from the D Party and two from the R Party. And I can't talk about any of them, except obviously Trump. But there are people out there that I think that a lot of us could rally around on both sides of the aisle. I think that it's really useful to stop trying to think of everything as left versus right. That just divides us. I really think that the way to think about it is that do you want to live in a world in which you are able to make your own decisions and about how to raise your children, how to run your life, what seed to plant? Or do you want to live in a world in which all that responsibility is taken away and somebody else makes all those hard decisions for you? Because that's what they want. And the sad thing is that what this has shown us in the last 2.5 years is there's only about 10 to 20% of people that really want to be free. The rest of them want to be told what to do. And the problem is, those of us that want our freedom are going to have to fight for it once again, or we're going to be forced to live in their collectivist world.
So we're here with Dr. Malone. You're everywhere, all over the world, literally, you and Jill. And, we are so appreciative of all that you're doing. Love your Substack, your humor, Fridays, humorous stuff, but everything. I mean, Dr. Malone is not only a medical doctor, a research scientist, but you could talk about any of it. You have a lot in there.
I've lived a lot of life. I've been poor. I've had to, earn my living with my hands. I've lived in the most elite of academic circles and dealt with that. I've spent too much time at the World Health Organization, giving lectures and dealing with those people. I kind of get it, but I still got my feet on the ground.
So how can people reach you? How can you get a hold of you? Substack, is there other ways on the website?
So it's rwmalonemd.substack.com, and you can subscribe and it comes directly to your inbox. Okay. Getter.
A book coming out too,
We have this book called The Lies My Government Told Me in the Better Times Ahead that I should be editing right now instead of being here. But Molly asked me to come, so I came. And then Getter is our main channel on a daily basis. That's at RW Malone. We also post on True Social and Gab. The website that I think most people find most usable is Malone Institute. So that's maloneinstitute.org. And on that, we put a lot of our more lengthy things including the massive spreadsheet we've developed with all 2,700 graduates of the Young Leaders Program from the World Economic Forum. And you can look up by industry or by country or all kinds of parameters, a huge spreadsheet, tons of information. And you can find out where these folks live and what they do and who they work for and when they were trained, what class they came through. It's a 5-year training program. These people are indoctrinated by the World Economic Forum. They're trained. And they include people like Gavin Newsom, Governor Inslee, Justin Trudeau, his finance minister, Pete Buttigieg. They've embedded people all through our government. They're very proud of embedding them through the Canadian government, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, most of the key leadership in Australia. All these people that have been so autocratic, so totalitarian, they've all been trained by the World Economic Forum. As far as I'm concerned, they ought to have to register as foreign agents. Their allegiance is not the United States. They believe that nation states are obsolete. That's the underlying ugly thing here, is there's a belief now that autonomous nation states with sovereignty is an obsolete idea, and we need to get rid of it. And we need to go to a centralized world government. It's basically run like the United Nations. And all these things that you hear about, like the open borders. So it's a paradox. Why do they have the southern border open? Why all these people just coming across, right? And if you travel some, you realize that the same thing is happening in Germany. The same thing is happening in France. In most of the EU states, open borders. Why is that? Well, Agenda 2030 with the UN specifically says there should be no national borders. They believe this is the right thing to do. The farmland issues that are happening where the farmland is all getting gobbled up and they're parking it, saying you can't plant there like the farmers in the Netherlands, etc. That's all Agenda 2030 written in the UN and endorsed by the World Economic Forum. All this stuff that we're experiencing, the management of global warming and all that, that's all coming from Brussels. And people think when they hear World Economic Forum, they think Davos. These guys, all these rich guys, and it's a club of the 1,000 largest companies and their owners. It's basically a trade organization for the rich of the rich. Okay, the richest of the rich have a trade organization. It's called the World Economic Forum. And yeah, they do go to Davos every year, but they also go to China every year. People don't know about that. They also have a meeting in China. And these organizations like BlackRock that you hear about, Larry Fink, they have trillions of dollars invested in China. They live in a world in which our ideas of Russia, England, and the EU and the United States all being separate countries from Brazil, that's not the world they want to live in. That's not the world that they're making. And they think that everything should be, fused together under one big umbrella organization that's basically run by the rich people. Why should they run it? Well, because they're rich and we're not. It's the golden rule, right? Those are the gold make the rules. In any case, you can find where these guys live that have been trained as their foot soldiers and placed all over the world by going to maloneinstitute.org and pulling down that spreadsheet on the Young Leaders.
So all about globalism, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, all those guys, the World Economic Forum, they all put this together. They want total control. Looks like, right now they're with the Chinese Communist Party, but I personally believe, China's so big, let them in the little club now and they may turn on. But I don't know if that's right.
I think cases we made, they already have. So this is, if you care about your freedom,
so you're an American guy, right? That's what Trump is.
That is, I totally believe in the Constitution, in the American Enlightenment, in the brilliant wisdom of the founding fathers. And I still believe strongly that the Constitution and the Republic. Remember, we don't have a democracy. That's another misnomer. We have a republic.
If we can keep it. Brother Ben.
Yep.
All right, Dr. Malone. And I have been accused at least once of looking like, even Ron Johnson said, go get the guy that looks like Malone. I had to go to use the restroom, and I missed my big time. I could have been famous and said that, and I had to go use the restroom. But I have had a kiss or two on the cheek.
Well, congratulations. You take all those kisses and let your wife deal with it, because my wife says absolutely no. So.
All right. We appreciate it, Dr. Malone. You keep up the hard work, and we're praying for you. You're doing good work, and we have to stay free.
I think not for just us, but for our kids.
Yeah. Grandkids.